Welcome to The Space Between. On this episode, I am joined by Dan Marko. Dan is a senior spiritual wellness provider at Canyon Ranch in Lenox, Massachusetts. He also has a private practice that helps others integrate spiritual philosophy into an embodied way of living. Dan incorporates his diverse background in mind-body practices within the wellness field through his work in personal training, massage therapy, energy healing, and shamanic work. Together, we dig into all things forgiveness. It's one of the most important themes in The Space Between. We discuss how forgiveness is the key in moving towards a new way of embodied living and thriving in the world. Join us as we connect through conversation. Welcome to The Space Between. My name is Alyson and I am thrilled to have you back for another episode of the Space Between podcast. And today we are going to talk about a theme that, in my opinion, has never been more important, of forgiveness. And I want to welcome Dan Marko to The Space Between. Dan, welcome.
Alyson, nice to be here.
Thanks
for the invitation.
So much for being here. And Dan has traveled the farthest to be a guest on The Space Between. And we'll talk about that. He did not get on a plane, just to be clear. But we'll talk about how we met, and it's a beautiful story. And just for the listeners maybe that haven't tuned into an episode, The Space Between is really this interesting time, this sort of funky, transitional, somewhat difficult, albeit beautiful in ways, time that we find ourselves in. And it's a time of great transition, of great change, and it's time for us to reconnect and to connect back to ourselves, most importantly, and then to connect with one another. And today we're going to have a conversation about forgiveness.
Yeah. The space between and spiritual practice is what everyone's seeking.
Absolutely.
Space between thoughts, space between one creative act and another. So I love the title of the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Dan, and we had just had lunch, so Dan got the real deal of how it was named. And I actually can't take credit for it. It was Universal and a woman I met at a cafe. But thank you for saying that too. And it's funny how when I began this work, how the space between, right, the pings from the universe just comes up all the time. If it's in a book I'm reading or if I hear somebody say it. And it's been very beautiful to have those sort of universal reinforcements. So I'm grateful that you get it, and I'm happy that you're here today. So why don't we start with you introducing yourself, and then we can, quickly talk about how we met and then get into it today. So Dan, who are you?
Who am I? Who is this guy? So currently, my main role as far as caregiving goes, as I'm a spiritual wellness provider with the Canyon Ranch organization. But I've been in the wellness world since 1979. I started out as a personal trainer because of what happens to people when they're training hard. Yes. I went to massage therapy school, and during that time, I got awakened to energy within and around the body. And then that led to a huge exploration of consciousness and psychology, spiritual practices, mysticism. So I get to weave all of those magical things together in my current role. So I am super excited and happy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
What an amazing path and what an amazing journey that's brought you to your present place in this world and your present place in this amazing energy that's shifting and changing, and what you do and what you provide is needed more than ever, to your point of what people are searching for and what people are really wanting to transform to. So the transformation can many times feel unsettling and rocky, but there is such a beautiful piece to transformation as well. It brings us to
absolutely
the next energetic wave, or the next phase or journey, and it never ends, right?
Yeah. And I think that this weaving of what is forgiveness anyway, why are we going to talk about that? It really is the space between who we have been, who we are in this moment, and who we are becoming. And so that's the practice, really. And, it's intentional. But it's a really potent time, and having that spiritual mindset of we are all part of this divine creative spark in the universe.
Yes.
And we just have to understand better how we're using energy through our body, through our emotions, and through our mind. So we'll get into that as we're talking.
All of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when you said who we were, who we are, and who we are becoming, like I'm about to sit here and cry because that's exactly what I say anytime someone asks me about what the space between is. Mm-hmm. And it just touches my heart to have someone that I respect and admire so much be able to just like say that back to me. Like, oh, let's get another universe. Like, this is amazing. Folks, this is it. Like, this is what we always talk about, right? So you and I met a few months ago. The listeners have known I've had an interesting couple of years, and I think you got to go through a lot of shit in order to bring something like this out into the world. It was my hazing, so to speak. But I had met you at a very interesting time of what I would consider a big leap in my journey and in my practice. And I was supposed to go on vacation, and my husband ended up not feeling well, and we couldn't go. And I ended up at Canyon Ranch, and I think I booked that trip the day before I went. So it wasn't something that I had been planning. There wasn't this whole I'm sure people plan for months and months to go to Canyon Ranch, and it's such a beautiful place. We'll link it below, of healing and reconnection and education, right? It's just a wonderful place. And I knew when I had arrived there, the minute I drove in, that was exactly where I was supposed to be. Because I had a whole other trip to Mexico booked. I was actually supposed to be in Mexico that day. And I was like, nope, it was supposed to be in Lenox, Massachusetts on March, whatever it was. And that led me to meet you. And when you sign up for the courses, and there's a lot of different things you can do at Canyon Ranch, when I saw forgiveness, I don't know if it was self-forgiveness or forgiveness. I don't remember exactly what the title was. It was the first thing I signed up for.
Oh. Yeah, the current working title is Forgiveness, Reclaiming Your Personal Power.
That's exactly what it was. And I'm walking in like broken, right? I'm going like, yes, I need my power back. And listen, not for nothing, it happened. It happened that weekend. I stepped out of that experience a different version of me than I stepped in. And I'm grateful to you and so many other amazing people that work there and some people that I met. And it was just a wonderful experience. So let's get into forgiveness. We do a couple things here at the Space Between. We usually start by reading some definitions. So I always joke, the Oxford Dictionary is the oldest dictionary in the world. And so I always try to see a lot of these things we talk about, there's not even a definition. It's like we've gone well beyond whenever these definitions were created. So I have two definitions that I'm going to read, and then I want to hear your thoughts. So the first definition from the Oxford Dictionary is to stop feeling angry with someone who has done something to harm, annoy, or upset you. Okay. And then to stop feeling angry with yourself. I'm like, okay. A definition that resonated with me was an intentional decision to let go of resentment or anger. So those are what we call the textbook definitions of forgiveness. How would you respond to that, Dan?
I think there's some truth in both of those.
Yes.
I would expand it out to what needs to be detached from. Goes way beyond anger. So in the conversation that I share with guests is there's anger, there's delusions, there's disgust, there's envy, fear, greed, lust, shame, sorrow. Those are all the big triggers that we attach to. We start to live through, and we have to discover, which one of those is it? Or is it a combination? A lot of the research being done is focused on resentment. So the big centers of research at Boston, UW-Madison, Wisconsin, and Stanford, their clinical awareness is, Americans, we get resentful.
Yeah. We really do. Have we ever been more resentful than we are now? Some with good reason, no shade. Things are tough, right? But there's a lot of people walking around with a big old chip.
Yep.
Yeah.
And partially it's the forgiveness work is primarily, first it's self-forgiveness. Stop doing harmful actions towards ourselves. Then it's potentially forgiving others who may have participated actively or passively in what we perceive to be a harmful, painful, and a loss of something, loss of connection of some kind. And then occasionally, because we're human, we'll also do some harm. Again, intentionally, accidentally, and we have to be mindful of, I have to let others forgive me. Mm-hmm. And so there's a dynamic shift of awareness in there because if we're honest, not many of us want to admit, I did harmful action.
Yeah, no one is absolved of it's the human experience.
Exactly.
Wouldn't be as fun, right, if it wasn't all this trauma happening.
Yeah.
Well, I loved when I had originally heard your talk, how you start with self. And I think in this plane of existence that we live in, it's a lot of external victimization or, it's this person's fault. There's so much that goes on that really impacts how we feel about ourselves, that a lot of times, even in certain therapies, it's like, my mother did this to me, or my friend did this to me, or my wife did this to me. And there's this sort of energy that exists to keep us away from connecting back to ourselves. And the self-forgiveness, I don't know how you could forgive anyone else or allow someone else to forgive, right? To have that forgiveness if you don't forgive yourself. I guess, could you speak to that? I don't know how that would be possible, energetically or the like, right?
Yeah. So partially the focus on self-forgiveness comes from it's a presentation I'm offering, and most often the other parties in the story are not in the room.
Right.
So you really can't have a dialogue-based or even an energetic awareness with the other in real time.
Yes.
It's in the memory system, so you can pull up a lot of information.
It's not gone.
But that's why the focus primarily is, am I doing things that are actually self-harming?
Right.
Because I can change that. Anybody can change that as long as they know they're doing it. And this is this refocusing of awareness to, what am I actually doing, or what am I allowing to happen that's harmful?
Right.
And then if I understand I'm also pushing back, because sometimes we're in a power play with the others in our story of harm, loss, and pain. And then it just becomes, it's not solution finding, it's not about restitution, it is about power playing. It's who's more powerful, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Right. So we have to kind of open up this space of, do I want to heal? Meaning, do I want to be less stressed?
Right.
Do I want to be less resentful? Do I want to be less anxious, less sad? Whatever it is, it's a conscious choice. And the research in the last 25 years, they did this beautiful blending of, this is psycho-spiritual awareness. We are aware that we're part of this creative force in the universe. And when we use our thoughts in a certain way based on our own belief systems, so forgiveness practice is coming in and saying, well, what do I actually believe about this harm, loss, and pain, the experience of it, and then the aftermath of it? So the connector to, well, what's the loss? It is about self-identity. I used to be a patient person, and I'm not that way anymore. I used to be a kind person, and I'm not so kind anymore. Or I used to be a very generous person, and now I'm finding myself not so generous or trusting, or whatever the qualitative sense of self is.
Right.
It's a reconnection with that. The harm piece is, how are you framing it? Is it a betrayal? Is it a manipulation? Is it under the abuse umbrella? I'll just leave it at that. There's lots of realms that people can go into, but that's the naming. that sets the tone of how you're going to work energetically with yourself and with others. Because if whenever we feel, let's just say, okay, I got manipulated, at some point we go back in and the self-forgiveness piece is, oh, I got manipulated.
Right.
I don't like that. But it's not about the other. It's about I was manipulated.
Right.
And then what am I doing to myself about that?
Right. How many times am I replaying that story? And I think that's the piece too, where I'm sure many people listening to this struggle, because there's the harmful things we do. And then there's that track here.
Mm-hmm.
And that is sometimes, many times, a runaway train.
Yeah.
Because something happens. Let's take your manipulation example, right? You've been manipulated. Happens to all of us. What is the story that we're playing in our head about that manipulative event?
Mm-hmm.
For me, that story somehow continues to change over time.
We do like to elaborate.
I'm a writer of my own, sadly, fictional, right?
Yeah.
Narrative.
Yeah.
And we talk about narratives a lot on the podcast. There's no better narrative than the narrative that lives in your head.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. The narrative that says, oh, I can't shine my light as bright as I could,
Right.
or I used to.
Right. Because of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm never going to be the same.
Believe it.
I'm never going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we carry, and this is something I really resonated with in your talk, all of the different points, right? The physical, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, right? Those are the four.
Mm-hmm.
I think you called them PEMS, right?
Yeah.
Physical,
PMS,
emotional,
yeah.
PMS, yeah. And we carry it all.
Yeah.
That is so much weight that we are carrying around.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable when you think about it. And then you have one person times how many billions of people are on the planet? We wonder why. Woo! That's what's going on, folks. And that's really the collective unconscious, because you have your own stuff and then you have everything that's swirling around you.
Yeah.
And it's a lot to manage right now.
It is. So the idea with this forgiveness practice is we don't have to wait for divine intervention.
Yep.
We notice I'm experiencing pain. I notice that I'm experiencing stress response in my body, in my emotions, in my mind. Mm-hmm. And that is separating me from myself and from others and allowing others to get close to me, because I've got all these now self-protective mechanisms at work. And so part of forgiveness practice is it's the acceptance of I have experienced harm, loss, and pain. To get a sense of remorse around that. Because hopefully no one was looking to get harmed.
Right.
And there is the space of, from the place of remorse, this sucks. Sometimes there's some grief work that needs to go along with it. But remorse is more of the power to go, let's not allow that to happen to the best of our ability moving forward.
Right.
You know, we'll still stumble. We're humans. We'll form new relationships and then we'll discover certain things. But the idea is, what's the restitution story that I'm actually seeking? So the encouragement is, if you've never written the story out about harm, loss, and pain, write it out. It's not to keep it, but it is to find your key power words within your story. And then to understand, well, how does that word show up in my physical body? What emotions does it enhance? In which ones does it suppress? And then with the mind's eye, you're just noticing, well, how's my curiosity? What am I actually curious about? Am I curious about restitution and healing? Or am I curious, again, about these, how can I get one up?
Right.
'Cause,
am I just perpetuating another cycle, which happens?
Yeah. Because sometimes we're not looking for forgiveness. We're looking for getting even.
Yes.
Getting equal.
Yeah.
Or
especially if we really feel, or if it's something that has happened multiple times and we've continued to allow it, that's when that sometimes can get even more like triggered, right? That's an interesting point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
So starting with the self, and you gave us some great thoughts of action steps that we can take to be able to move through, not resolve, right? Because if depending on how the intensity of what happened to you, this may be something that you need to just keep managing over the course of time, right? There's some things that are very, very hard whether something has been done to us or we've done something. But then there's the forgiveness of others.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, when I sat in that room, I had a lot going on in my marriage. And my husband's been on the podcast. He tells me there's not many things that I'm not allowed to talk about on here. Although, I don't know, babe. We'll revisit that from time to time. But we were in a really interesting cycle of, and we're going to do another episode of just these really, really heavy expectations. And we were carrying so much traumatization of each other.
Mm-hmm.
There was such an energetic loop happening, right? And I was very much like, okay, I sort of kind of understand my piece of it, although for years I didn't think I had any piece of it, which is part and parcel issue number one. But then when you start to realize and you start to be very open, I think there's such an openness that needs to happen with this work. When you're diving into forgiveness, you have to be so open to be able to see each other and where those issues lie and what is really actually happening here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. So how would you talk about the forgiveness that you can give to another person?
So if you're able to free up your own energy flow, like come back to a place of trust in self, a place of being humble and curious, of being that brutally honest, kind of attention of, I can definitely engage in some harmful action. Or I can sit in that space of honesty and respect and speak truth to these are the actions or inactions within our relationship that influence me in a loss, harm, and painful way. So it's the best we can, it's to depersonalize it, although it is another person.
Mm-hmm. Challenging in its own right, but that's what you have to do.
We do. And we have to be aware of the expectation that we have in place. Was that ever actually expressed?
Mm-hmm.
Or was that
chances are it wasn't. It was just assumed.
Exactly.
My husband should know exactly how I feel at all times. Like, poor guy. I that hit me again when I was there that weekend. I'm like, have I even said this? Oh God. Okay. And that self-reflection that allows you then to forgive yourself and start to forgive the other.
Yes. So part of it is the expectation we hold on another. Do they have the skillful means to actually provide it? They might.
Do you even understand what you're even asking of somebody?
Exactly.
Is it just another trauma response? Like, you should do this.
So that's one side.
Chances are it is.
And the other is to, if we're looking at the other through the lens of they're the manipulator, we'll stay with that key word we started with. That's a lens that we are literally seeing them as that.
Yes.
And then there is this subconscious, sometimes real conscious awareness of, I'm not that.
Yeah.
You're projecting that onto me. People get really defensive. And we all know this. We can walk up, and if we have a sense someone's blaming us for something, you're going to get tight.
Yeah.
And so this is the somatic, the body awareness piece is, so what tightens up first? Your jaw? Is it your gut? Is it your chest? Is it your hands? Is it your sphincter muscle?
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing?
Right.
That's how you track awareness is, that's my trigger. Okay.
It's so powerful. And I've been on a long journey to get into my body. And it just becomes easier. It's just like working out at the gym, right? The more that you're in the body, the more you realize where everything is really connected. And that's such a beautiful way to think about it too, because a lot of times when we're in those moments, right, it can be really intense when you're having those, defensive arguments or everybody's pissed off and tensions are heightened. But if you can, it's hard to check out of here when you're in that state. If there's a way to, and by the time this airs, we'll have had an episode of somatics and sort of body therapy and movement and things like that. And how do we start to open up from just here. And the funny thing that Talia Shafir, Dr. Shafir said, your head is attached to the rest of your body. I think a lot of people forget that. But a lot of times it is. It's really hard to live in the mind and to see and feel, where that might be manifesting. That's a great clue to say, okay, stand down. Something is happening here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this is something that you really, really hit me with. We always have a choice with forgiveness. I wrote it down in my journal 5 times during your talk because that was such a big theme.
Mm-hmm.
We have a choice as to whether we want to keep engaging or if we want to take a step back and neutralize and be like, okay, see what's really going on here.
Yeah. So that's the spiritual wellness practice, because simultaneous options are available all the time.
Yeah.
And so some of us have become conditioned, habituated, sometimes even encouraged to drop into these altered states of anger or fear or envy or whatever else it is. And then it becomes like an acceptable, automatic way of expressing ourselves. But there's other ways we could express ourselves, do the healing work, and not cause more harm. So a little bit of anger can be useful. A little bit of fear can be useful as fuel, as awareness fuel. But then what's the response? And that's the restitution piece, is what needs to be said? What needs to be done? What are the acts that we need to put in place to reduce harm in this moment? And then hopefully get to a space where we're not harming moving forward.
Right. Ourselves or the other.
Correct.
And I love that. I was going to bring up the restitution. See, the conversation always goes where it's supposed to. It's the response, right? Because that word can mean, that has an interesting charge, right? That word restitution. It's the response. It's, the choice.
Yes. So again, I'm framing restitution as the act.
Let's unpack that. So we can
the
be
act
really
that
clear.
leads to healing, physically, emotionally, mentally.
The action.
Correct.
Got it. And that's a lot of times when we're in a state of, well, I guess what's the opposite of forgiveness?
Unforgiveness.
Okay. We're in a state, that's amazing. If we're in a state of unforgiveness, then that is, again, very energetically charged.
There's a lot of people who use the term this action or this inaction,
right?
Like the passive watching some harm happen.
Yeah.
They put that in the unforgivable zone.
Right. Well, that's a whole other thing I wanted to bring up too.
Well, and there's this space of in the brain. The brain, sometimes it can be very binary. It's plus or minus.
Right. Black and white.
And you're either going to trigger a response towards healing or a response that ultimately is going to end up with harm.
Right.
So if you always have this trickle charge running through your nervous system, there's an unforgivable someone. Now that could be a person, that could be a group, that could be an institution, because sometimes harm is it's beyond just like interpersonal.
Right.
It's something bigger than that. And we're talking with people right now that some of their healing practice is understanding they're hooked into something that's greater than just one person. And then how do you deal that? Because it's still an other. And how do you, again, change the context of they did a harmful act, but how can you release your own stress-producing responses to the act?
Yeah.
How can you see them in a light that makes them spiritual again?
Right. And I love that you brought that up, because we're in this space between, and we talked about this before, is this incredible polarity of millions of people that have been marginalized by millions of other people. So the one-to-one, and I'd love you to speak on this, can be a great way to practice for the big game.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if you can manage self and figure out how to manage that and the forgiveness you have for yourself, the closer your relationship, the harder the forgiveness of others is, right? Who's the toughest cookie that you have in your life? If you could manage that, it's going to set you up really nice for what's going on in the collective.
It's true. And these ideas of all of our positive traits can go hyper or hypo state. So some of us who are very connected to, let's say, the sense of justice,
right,
we can get hyper vigilant on seeking justice. The question becomes, is that really restitution-based justice? So there's fairness for everyone is the idea.
Right.
Or is it still a little bit more about me or us than you?
Right.
And
which only creates more.
There's always
Boy, is that a fine line these days. Wow. Just turn on any social media platform or any news channel and you'll get a crash course in that.
Yes.
It's everywhere. And I loved what you said about the systems and the institutions, because you have the interpersonal human to human, and then you have institutions, which I'm not trying to tell people how to feel, but the institution itself is not the problem. It's generally the people that surround the institution.
Yeah.
But it can still feel like, oh, wow, I was, marginalized by this thing. Right? Which is so much bigger than even maybe millions or hundreds of millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
It is a way that people can feel very unempowered.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think we do have a lot of people that are existing on planet Earth today that, to no fault of their own, have been stripped of their power. And I think forgiveness and finding your power, and maybe that's where your title comes from. I don't know. You'll have to let me know. There's such a link to that, because I found it very hard to start stepping into my power and purpose if I wasn't able to let go of the stories that I had been carrying. And I sit here in a place of privilege, right? I'm sure someone else would have a very different take on that. I only have my own experience, right? But if you could talk a little about that too, I think. How does forgiveness and power, what does that look like?
So in the presentation, I typically focus on the energetic of shame. And, one of my favorite researchers is Brene Brown. And her work on vulnerability is, it's revelatory about, we can conceal all kinds of stuff. Now, with harm, loss, and pain experiences, typically what we conceal is our goodness.
Right. We shut it down.
We shut it down. So we dim our own light. And so all spiritual practices have to do with turning your light back on to its full brightness again, and allowing the other to turn their light on too. So there's that compassionate key is, somehow they learned a pattern that altered them. This is not excusing. This is awareness of they need to change that pattern because it is harmful. But we can't hold an expectation over them that they're going to. We need to do our own healing and carry on, because in the modern context of forgiveness, there's clarity because it's psycho-spiritual. There are some relationships that should not be redeemed, should not be reconciled.
Absolutely.
Because one or both parties, they still got work to do and they could harm each other.
Right.
So it's best just to detach from each other without holding anything against the other.
Right.
And so you're both free.
Right.
And that's a tricky dance sometimes too.
Yeah. That's very, very difficult to manage.
So coming back to kind of the importance of self-healing is it's really shedding shame-based identity.
Yeah.
Because, again, that puts us in a diminished sense of self. And nobody likes that.
No.
But it can be a way of being in the world, of being less than, being not enough. And that creates a whole crisis of other things, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And sometimes it's even spiritually, because we can deny our own spirituality, our worthiness to accept, I am a spiritual being.
Right.
And therefore, I can redeem myself. so can the others. And but it's a space where we're not comfortable, just like hanging out is like
No.
that shame thing. First of all, to admit that you feel shame, that's not easy.
No. And when you first feel that,
Yeah, that's a body thing.
Damn right it is. It's so deep too. And when you think about, sort of the different, I don't know what they call it, but the scale of energy, right? You have your denser energy that's like shame, guilt, and then you have enlightenment and love and all of the things. Those denser energies are used on this planet for a very specific purpose, right? And polarity is, everything is because it's all one. But it's very, very difficult in this energy today to be able to deal with what goes on outside of yourself and then come home and sit in your shame. It is very, very hard. In episode 5, I believe, with Neelam Patel, who's a good friend of mine, we've unpacked shame.
Oh, beautiful.
It's a fantastic episode. So definitely check that out if you haven't checked it out. But the dimming of the light is something that is very present in the space between.
Mm-hmm.
It's really challenging in these energies to step into who you really are. Because like we said, we're in this weird time, like we're still trying to figure it out. Then I have my shame to deal with. I have to forgive myself. Listen, we're not saying this is easy. It's a lot. But on the other side of this, there's such a release and such a shedding.
Exactly.
And they say, oh, the grass is never greener. You get through this work and keep working it, the grass is greener.
Yes.
For sure.
So that's another piece of mystical practice within forgiveness as well, because this psycho-spiritual connection, so the mind plays a big part in how we identify.
Yeah.
So sometimes there's just the pure acceptance of, oh, I've been identifying as a shamed person. And then you can get very specific of how. And then you just come in and you feel, where's that sitting? Literally in your body.
Yeah.
And then just through breath awareness, with the connection of pull in a positive attribute to the breath. So let's say this is a breath of truth. So I'm going to breathe that in. I'm going to fill my lungs. Truth goes into my bloodstream. Then it gets pumped by the heart to every cell in the body. So I start to shift the vibration internally. Then I just exhale it. I exhale the truth right back out. So it's not in comes the good air, out goes the bad. In comes the light, and out comes the light.
That's beautiful.
So we charge our outer presence as well. So we're in full reciprocity on a very spiritual level. The creative source is just funneling in this positive vibration, and we just say thank you, and we offer it right back. We don't change it at all. It's just this flow. And then we look at the other and understand, well, they could do that too.
They choose.
If they choose.
Which I'm going to link the 4 agreements below. That book, and how, it's literally sat on my shelf for 10 years, and then I brought it to Canyon Ranch. That book is a life-changing book, the 4 agreements, because, it isn't about you. The words we speak, let my word be impeccable. Don't take anything personally. Words and thoughts are pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
and they have a lot of power.
And they're immediate.
Yes.
So this is the place of we're doing a ritual of detachment. Detachment of, this is how I've been using my energy. Repeating some kind of shame phrase, directing it at myself. And so I choose to stop doing that. And just that choice gives the brain a pause, the space between, to consider, what would I prefer to name myself? I am a truthful person. I am an honest person. I am a generous person. And we start to do that recovery of self. That's the restitution. We bring ourselves back to that original and perhaps even expanded sense of self. So when we're doing, kind of The psycho-spiritual look at it is, well, how intact was your identity before the harm, the loss, and the pain happened? Because sometimes we have this after the fact sense of self, but in the moment, it's like, maybe we were just not paying attention, actually.
Asleep at the wheel? Zombie-like? All been there the last few years.
So this is the intent of forgiveness practice, is to be liberated, to shine your brightness at full luminosity.
Yeah.
What does that mean? That means you can at any moment access joy, access hope, access trust and truth and all of the good stuff, because you're not being distracted by this little lingering anger, resentment thing. Yeah. And I always suggest, go to the thesaurus and really pay attention to what's the word that you're using. Anger is the core seed, right, but it has lots of branches. So disappointment, frustration, resentment are very common ones, but there's a lot more. Under the fear zone, you could go from, I just have a sense of now I'm always worrying, to now I'm in terror.
Right.
So there's that
really
pendulum
fast
swing.
too.
Exactly.
You said immediate. I mean, the words are immediate. And our body doesn't know the difference between an actual threat or a threat that's perceived by the mind. Mm-hmm. We've talked a lot about that on the podcast, right? The fight or flight. It's just who we are. It's the human being. Mm-hmm. But we do have a choice, and it is something that we actually can control. Yeah. Our reaction and how we manage all of this is within our control, because we feel as a collective very powerless. And the narrative is that we're powerless, right? Everything that's happening is outside of us and we can't control anything. We have so much more control and so much more choice than we're led to believe. Mm-hmm. That's something that everyone out there can trust. Mm-hmm. That's the truth.
So as part of my undergrad work in contemplative psych, the beauty was we literally had to go meditate, an hour a day.
Love that.
And
I wish that was part of my curriculum.
So my alma mater, Rope Institute, they had these beautiful meditation spaces. So I'd always go sit towards the front of the room where the candles are and the incense is burning, the beautiful mm-hmm. plants, and maybe there was even potentially a window where you could see outdoors. And I can tell you several times walking in there early feeling like I was the only one in there, and sitting there and about 15 minutes later going, who is making all the noise in the back of the room? And turning around and going, there's nobody there. I'm like, that's just my inner narrator just going to town.
That's so
And there's
awesome.
More than one narrator. I'm like, wow. So sometimes we have to have a mindfulness or meditation practice to pause long enough to go, I'm the one generating those thoughts. Yeah. It's not outside of me.
What a powerful way to realize that. That's a wow.
Yeah, the universe was kind because it was turn around and go, no, it's just you.
Turn around could have been something very different. No,
and then it's like, what would I have done if there would have been someone really there?
Got angry and became the victim. That's exactly what you would have done.
Recreated the pattern a little deeper.
And then been pissed off about it for 10 years later. See how this works?
That meditation stuff isn't even real.
It's amazing. But it's true. I mean, I just, again, sitting here in your energy with your path and what has led you to be able to explain this in a way that is just so beautiful. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome, of course.
We have so many options available to us, and there's so many modalities, and something I always challenge the listeners is to be curious, read, go to events, listen to podcasts, right? Not one person has the answer, but if you continue to be curious and you continue to want to heal, mm-hmm. you will get there. I mean, it's a lifetime, right? But there is a calm and a connectedness and a, dare I say, peacefulness that can be achieved. Not every moment of every day, but it is part of being a human as well.
Mm-hmm. So since your energy is moving here, if you could do just a little play. So one of the mystical tools comes from a teacher from the Andean tradition.
Okay.
And so Juan del Prado is a Andean mystical teacher. I've studied with him and his students for many years, but one of their techniques is that you visualize there's light above your head.
Wow.
And that light is coming from the source of all creative flow. And then you name the light. So you can say it's love. You can say it's compassion. You could say it's truth. And then you just let it just wash over you. And you can just literally feel light washing over you. Goes just like in the shower.
Yeah.
Goes out through your feet, right into the ground, down the drain. And the energy gets purified. It gets neutralized again, basically. And eventually it comes back up and you readapt to it. Right. Just as pure prana, chi, life force.
Life force.
But it's been purified of that heaviness. Yeah. And then when you feel the outside is done, you just imagine, you just open your skull a little bit, you pull light through, yep. Wash the inside of your head, your neck, your torso, your extremities. It's just like when we take our car to the car wash.
It's cleansing.
We do the outside, yep. And then we open up the doors, yep. We vacuum.
It's a great analogy, by the way. I've never heard anybody say it that way, because it is. It is.
And we just noticed that I've got residue of life on me.
Yes.
And that's all it is. I've got heaviness. It's like, I've got mud. Okay, fine. You want to know where the mud came from?
Right.
You can invest. Well, where were you driving?
Right.
You can go that route.
Yep. And we inherently know. If we just get quiet,
yeah,
we're always able to make the connections, and this is available to all of us. You know, a lot of times people think like, oh, they're sitting there. We all have this capacity.
We do.
It doesn't matter what our path or what we've done or not done. It's our right. It's our right of being birthed into this dimension, in this place.
Okay, so what did you feel if you imagine that energy ball?
It was interesting because when you said that, I felt I was swirling already with what I was talking about, the peace and the, what's there. And my light is generally like a light blue, and it was trust. Trust is a word that it's one of the words I continuously use. And I've done a practice where you bring it down in through the center of your being. But what I like about what you said is that there is also the wash of the external. Right. Mm-hmm. And that is another part of it as well. And I've been attuned in Reiki, and, that has been very, very helpful in the space between. My mom was a Reiki master. And so I got certified so I could give it back to her, because she's been giving it to everybody for so many years. So there are so many practices that people can do. And that, as simple as that. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, and it's not complex.
Exactly. That was the message from the tradition. Yeah. We can go kind of the Western psychotherapeutic model of get every little nuance. And sometimes there's just this, would you like to come back into fullness, to be liberated? And if you do, sometimes it really is a choice of, I'm just going to wash this stuff off. I don't need a narrative. I don't really need to understand how it happened, when it happened, where. I can let go of that, because the more important piece is I prefer to be liberated, to live my life in its fullness. Yeah. And right now, I'm not doing that. Right. So there's an important piece of commitment that this is real. I can do this. There is a certain kind of knowing / belief around, I can detach from that thought process.
And we all have that. It may feel really deep for some people. I know in times in my life it has. Just keep digging. It's there. Mm-hmm. It doesn't ever go away.
No.
It doesn't leave.
No. And
even though some people might think it has, it doesn't. It's not like that. It's not how it works. It can never be destroyed.
Well, it's also to start to recover. This is the restitution piece, is as we let go of that attachment to an altered state. The altered state is anger or fear or envy. So our authentic state is curious, kind, honorable, courageous. Those are all the things. We just unlearn those through some life experiences. Yep. So again, this reclaiming, this self-initiation.
Reconnection.
Yep.
Revisiting of who we really are. Mm-hmm. That's where this is headed. Yep. Say the space between, that's the other side.
Yep. So
if that even makes sense.
Yeah, but if you have anger arising, what's the anger about?
Right.
Is it about injustice? Then that's relevant anger.
Right.
If your shame is there is because you did something against your own ethics, and so you yourself are feeling a sense of maybe slight embarrassment or disgrace, then it's like you got to own that. Yeah. Reclaim your spiritual power.
And then don't sit in it. I mean, you can sit in it to learn, right? But then that's just, don't make it a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. You own it.
Because we can choose.
Yeah. It's the ownership of, I did harmful action.
Yep.
But then you don't suffer.
The accountability.
You forgive, and then you move forward again with more wisdom.
Right. With knowledge and an understanding. And to be able to help others too.
Yeah.
That struggle with it as we, talk amongst each other. So I have one last question for you. Doesn't this go so fast? So as far as the future is concerned, right, we want to end this on a hopeful note. I think we have a lot of, as tough as things are, I think we have a lot of reasons to be hopeful. And I know you share in that. What do you hope for the future when it comes to forgiveness? What is your hope for the collective?
That the dynamic, so personally, I've chosen the word reverence as a philosophical approach. For me, it's a really potent spiritual power as you look outward and as you look inward through that lens of reverence. There's a context of deep respect. If you approach anything with reverence, you would not do harm.
Right.
And if we could start to do that with one another, with the natural world, even within our political systems, everything that needs to be evolved, to be innovated so that it actually functions and serves, humanity and all of the other, kingdoms of the world equally, that shifts context. Now, everyone would have to have their own kind of philosophical grounding of how do I want to move forward. That space where in spiritual practice, you have to, can you get the discipline where you can love your enemy? I'm still working on that one.
Same.
So first of all, it's like
getting a little closer,
who did I name
though.
My enemy, and why did I name them my enemy?
Exactly.
So that's a big question.
Exactly.
And that's part of forgiveness practice too. Is I named somebody.
Is that part
not
two?
Nice. Not.
Is that part two? I don't know. I think we might have just hit part two.
So what do we get to name ourselves? That's the big thing.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Reverence. I'm going to hold on to that word. That's not a word you hear often, and it has a lot of beautiful power to it.
I like it.
And it's possible.
It resonates. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. This was incredible. I appreciate you. I appreciate next time when I have you back, we'll have to talk about what happened with you helping me and my husband and everything that had happened with that. I definitely want to unpack that. But if you have the opportunity to meet Dan at Canyon Ranch, it is such a beautiful place. Like I said, we'll link it below. They're doing such amazing, amazing work there. Very timely work. It's a place of healing. It's a place of rest. And don't worry, I'll have him back. So for those of you that can't make it, we're going to get him again. But thank you so much.
Thank
Dan,
you for the invitation.
It's been
a pleasure.
Yeah, for everything that you shared today. And I want to thank the audience for joining us again in the space between. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another episode. Thank you so much for joining us in the space between. We hope this conversation sparked connection for you. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who will find value. And make sure to tune into our next episode as we continue the journey into the core themes of our lives. We'll see you again in the space between.